a modern iconic duo. Two cameras, each fully refined, worthy of the legendary Leica name. Germany is the birthplace for these cameras, but the rugged American Southwest is the ideal place to showcase their strengths and also to find their weaknesses. Ready to settle this with a proper duel, lenses in my bag, and a good steed to ride. It's time to see what these two beasts are made of. Is this town big enough for the two of them? It's time to find out. Hi, if you're new here, my name is Lee and I make videos on all things where you might have a camera in your hand. Subscribe if you love photography too. I do a lot of gear reviews, but when I was able to borrow the SL2S from Leica for a week, I treated my time with it a little bit differently than I normally do. I didn't want to do a regular review. There's a bunch of those out there already. Being an SL2 owner myself, the questions that I wanted to answer during my time with the SL2S were, knowing that the SL2 and the SL2S are siblings, different but with the same genes, do I want to purchase the SL2S to sit alongside my SL2? And if so, when would I pick up one over the other on my way out the door? Let's discuss, and I'll share more photos and videos throughout. By the end of this video, you should be able to determine if one or the other is right for you. So like I said, the SL2S isn't the next gen SL2, it's a sibling. It's another camera body for the SL system, so there are differences. What do those differences mean in real life though? And I don't mean looking at test targets, I mean out in the real world, because there are differences on paper, and we'll discuss those in this video, but how do those differences make a difference to me while I'm creating my photography? And it's pretty simple, really. Either way, you are able to achieve beautiful photos and video, but do you want the high pixel count so you can pixel, peep, and crop, or do you want the utmost and low light / high ISO performance? We'll get more into that, but first let's discuss how the two bodies are the same. You can see right away that they have the same tank-like body, with the exception of the Leica name and camera name being blacked out on the SL2S. The body is all metal with a pretty deep grip. In fact, for those of you that complain about small camera bodies these days, this might be a place for you to look. Plus, the SL2S will work with all of the SL2 accessories, including the battery grip. The bodies are both also weather sealed with a rating of IP54. All of that means that the bodies are very robust. I've had the SL2 out in some pretty wet weather, and you'd never know it. Both cameras, of course, have the same mount, the L mount, meaning that they can both use all of the L mount Alliance lenses from Leica, Panasonic, and Sigma. You'll see that I used lenses from all three brands in my time comparing these two bodies. They use the same battery. They each have two SD card slots that take UHS 2 cards. They have the same ports, including a full-sized HDMI and audio in and out, as well as USB-C. And you can charge each using that USB-C port while you're using the camera. The bodies have the same electronic viewfinder, LCD, and top display. Are you getting the impression that these cameras are very similar? It's because they really are. In my use of them walking around in the desert with one on each arm, I had to actually look at the camera to make sure what I was using. There are very few features that let you know which camera you're using while you're using it. Much of their construction on the inside is the same as well. They have the same in-body image stabilization, which gains you up to 5.5 stops. This is very helpful for handheld video and low light photography. They each use contrast detect only autofocus. I have been impressed with its overall accuracy on the SL2, and likewise, I've been impressed with the SL2S. It isn't the fastest or most advanced autofocus system out there, but it does get the job done. Neither of these is the camera that I would necessarily pick up for sports photography or where speed is of the utmost importance, but I have used my SL2 on birds in flight and all sorts of other moving things. It's simply a matter of setting expectations and being practiced with your camera. And I didn't notice a difference in the autofocus performance between these two bodies. The bodies have the same processor, but here's our first real difference. Because the file sizes of the SL2S are smaller, more on that in a minute, but the raw file sizes of the SL2 are roughly twice the size of the SL2S's raw files. The buffer is deeper on the SL2S. Now the size of the buffer memory is the same, 4 gigs, but more files will fit into that using the SL2S. Actually, it's basically endless, while the SL2's fills at 78 frames. So if you do prefer that endless buffer, the SL2S may be attractive to you. Speaking of that buffer, the cameras are nearly the same in terms of speed in frames per second. In continuous super speed, the SL2 will do 20 frames per second, while the SL2S will do 25. But there are trade-offs at that frame rate, like no autofocus or auto exposure or white balance changes between shots. It also drops down to 12-bit RAW when shooting in RAW. So looking at continuous medium, where you do retain those auto features and 14-bit RAW, the SL2 can shoot 6 frames per second, while the SL2S can do 5, which I found interesting, but that's what the spec sheet says. And as I mentioned before, I wouldn't consider these cameras to be dedicated sports or wildlife cameras. In fact, your telephoto lens options are limited, even taking into consideration that you have 3 brands to work with. I do think that these bodies are great all-around cameras where the top speed probably isn't even a consideration for most people looking at them. Continuing the discussion into usability, the bodies have the same menus and user interface. It is a very easy to use interface. In fact, while the menus aren't as deep as some other brands, they don't have as many options to customize each and every detail of how the camera works. I prefer this overall UI to anything else I've used, but that's personal preference. If you use video, the 2 cameras have most of the same functionality. I will put the specs up on the screen right now, but both will shoot in 4K 30p and 422 10-bit to the SD card, as long as you have a fast enough card in the camera. The SL2 gains the ability to record in 5K 30p, but the SL2S has no 29-minute recording restriction. Either way, you're getting a solid option for video. All right, let's get to the big difference between these bodies, the sensor. They both have a full frame sensor, but while the SL2 has a 47.3 megapixel sensor, the SL2S has a 24.6 megapixel sensor. But the number of pixels isn't the only difference. The SL2S has a CMOS BSI sensor, and it is the first time Leica is using a sensor of that type. The idea is that it will have better high ISO performance, meaning less color noise and better color throughout the ISO range. And the ISO range of each body differs. The SL2 has a range of 50 to 50,000, and the SL2S has a range of 50 to 100,000. Those are both pretty incredible numbers. In fact, let's take a look at a couple pairs of photos. First, looking at this set of unedited images, both captured at ISO 1600 in the pre-dawn light of the desert. We see a number of differences. Right away, you can see that the color science is different. I wouldn't say either is better or worse. It has nothing to do with the ISO sensitivity. This is just personal preference, but if you are planning to have both bodies and use them side by side, you will potentially need to do some adjusting in post to true them up. Jumping to my edited versions, I could already see more grain in the SL2 image in the areas where I lifted the shadows, but zooming into each image, you can really see what I mean here. Moving on up to images captured at ISO 50,000, which is the top ISO for the SL2. Again, these are unedited, and again, we can see the difference in the color science, but the difference in the amount of noise in the images between the two becomes more pronounced here. The SL2S image is certainly less noisy. And then I cranked the ISO on the SL2S up to its top setting, 100,000, and I dare say it's still less noisy than the SL2 image at ISO 50,000. What this means is, if you find yourself in low light situations a lot, the SL2S may win the day for you. But not so fast. It isn't that easy. What are you trading for that low light performance? You're trading resolution. Remember that the SL2 has nearly twice as many pixels as the SL2S. The SL2 has 47, while the SL2S has 24, which means that you have more ability to crop on the SL2. If we talk about an APS-C crop, the SL2 retains 20.2 megapixels and the SL2S only has 10.6. If you like to pixel peep or crop, you still have quite a bit of latitude to crop on the SL2S. You just have a lot more on the SL2. For me, I do like to crop. And having the extra latitude, especially in situations like this one with my little whiskered friend here, we can zoom right in on his or her little pink nose and see the reflection of the plants behind me in their eye. One more thing to think about related to megapixels is file size. Having more pixels, the SL2's files are much larger than the SL2S's. A 14-bit RAW file from the SL2 will be about 84.4 megabytes, while the RAW file from the SL2S will be about 44 megabytes. It means that you need larger cards in the camera, more storage and backups at home. It takes longer to transfer the files. This is just one more consideration when making your decision. And speaking of considerations when making your decision, price. The SL2 body only in the US is $59.95, while the SL2S is significantly less at $48.95. That could definitely influence your decision. Are those extra pixels worth the extra dollars to you? So I asked a couple questions at the beginning of this video. Do I want to purchase the SL2S to sit alongside my SL2? And if so, when would I pick up one over the other on my way out the door? My answer is that I'm holding off on purchasing the SL2S, at least for now. For me, it isn't different enough from the SL2 for me to feel strongly about owning it, especially because I also own the Q2, which I didn't even discuss in this video. But if I did have both, when would I pick up one over the other? The only time I would truly prefer the SL2S is when doing astrophotography. I simply prefer to have the higher pixel count of the SL2 so that I can crop when I want to. I am often hiking with only one or two lenses, and something like a jackrabbit shoots across the trail. If I have the SL2 in the 24-90, I can crank it to 90 millimeters, then crop significantly in post-processing while retaining tremendous detail. That being said, I think both of these cameras are fantastic. I would recommend either. The SL2 if you are super into cropping and pixel peeping, the SL2S if you either want to spend a little less or the high pixel count isn't so important to you, or if you want the better low light performance. No matter which you choose, you are getting the Leica interface, the Leica build quality, the Leica look. You really can't go wrong. I'd love to hear from you though. Did any of you notice any differences in the photos and videos I showed from the two cameras, maybe that I didn't mention in this video? I'd love to hear if you have or are thinking about purchasing one of these bodies. What are your thoughts? Why are you leaning towards one or the other? Thank you to Leica for allowing me to borrow the SL2S, and thank you for watching.